Leslie got back. Leslie got some. I wonder if he know that I know he's lying right now. Oh, you got the new Margiela?
DJ Philly's famous.
I see you. That's your BMW? That's nice. That's your girl? Golly. Okay, I see you. But I just want to know one thing. Hey, you ready? Why the lying? Why you always lying? Oh my God. Stop lying. Always lying to me. You lying so much. You making it hard for me. Yeah. Every time you tell me something, I figure that you're lying. Ooh, it's almost like you faking. Oh yeah. Yeah, I know you're lying, but you sound excited, and you know that I know.
Let me just stop you right there, okay? First, you lied, right? Then, you lied about lying, okay? Then, you lied about lying about lying, okay? So before you lie about lying about lying about lying about lying, stop lying.
Well, hello everybody. My name is Jason DeCosta. Thank you for joining me today on my show called Consistent Preterism. Today's title is The Roast of Dr. Don K. Preston. And for those of you who have been following along in the interactions over the last few weeks, you've noticed probably, if you've been paying close attention, some pretty interesting and suspicious activity on Dr. Preston's YouTube channel. We'll kind of start from the top, and we're going to run through a little bit of a history. And then I'm going to share some things that are quite concerning about the good old doc. So the initial thing that took place was when Daniel Rogers was doing videos for Dr. Preston a couple weeks back in his absence. I just got the urge to kind of go over there in the comments and kind of put them to the test. And I had seen that Dr. Preston was engaging in the comments, so I knew that he was actively watching what was being said and interacting. So I figured this would be a good time to get both of them on the same thread and see what they have to say. So I put them to the fire and asked them some pretty problematic questions based on their view of theology. And really got no answer initially from Daniel Rogers. He did attempt a couple of attempts, but as soon as he realized the strength of the arguments that were being put forth to him, he quickly abandoned engaging very wisely. And he sort of just let it sit there in silence for a while. Another day went by. I think it was the second day. I put him to the flame again and asked him some more questions, knowing that people would be seeing these things. Daniel, I don't even know if he responded that second day. It just kind of sat there again. And then hours later, someone asked, someone who is also IO asked, hey, aren't you guys going to, do anything about this? Bell, Preston, where are you guys, And suddenly William Bell, shortly after, comes out with a long-winded, useless, really, just rant that was totally irrelevant, didn't deal with any of the questions that was put forth, and he just presented that as an attempt to hopefully, I guess he thought people would kind of buy into it and think that he refuted some of the points, even though it was totally irrelevant what he said. So I came back and I responded, and then the following day, I came back with a 6 or 7 comment response, sort of like a summary of my view from start to finish and why the things that they say are not true. And I presented that to William Bell, and the reason why it was 7 comments was because YouTube kind of limits how long your comments can be. Anyways, long story short, Bell never replied. I got tons of replies and messages from people and feedback saying that the summary that I provided was lights out. It was like a knockout punch. And Bell's lack of a reply was pretty telling, because where are you going to go with that? I mean, there is nowhere you can go. It sort of encapsulates, locks, and strangles the argument right out of you like a boa constrictor. So Bell sort of raptured up into the third heavens, and nobody heard from him. So then I waited a couple days, and when Dr. Preston came back on, Dr. Preston started posting his musings again, and I started to comment on his audios and see if he had any sort of intelligent answers for my dilemmas. He came back with the very basic argument, didn't engage my points at all. For those of you who followed along, and I know there were actually many of you who did. I saw at least a half dozen of you over there in the comments as well, and I appreciate you guys joining in. But so he didn't really engage my points, and everybody was kind of pressing him on why he's not engaging the facts. And with Scripture, all of his points were basically just his opinion, and he didn't back it up with any Scripture. He was stripping things out of the main context, and his main reply to me in all of this was, well, God judged pagans. God judged foreign nations. Why did God judge foreign nations, right? So I kept presenting him with the clear fact that the resurrection and judgment was only for the 12 tribes of Israel. In Matthew 19, Jesus clearly says it. Acts 26, Paul says it was the hope of Israel, which the 12 tribes hoped to attain. The age to come in Luke 20, I let him know that was actually only something that those who are worthy to attain to it would receive. So I asked him, how is he in the age to come, and what passages is he using to prove that pagans rose in the final judgment and stood before the throne and the judge and the books and were judged according to the law that they did not have. I held him to the flame on the fact that no other nations had the law written on their hearts. I presented him with facts about Romans 2, that these ones who by nature, keyword naturally, do the things written in the law of Moses, they are a law unto themselves, which would accuse or excuse them in the soon to come day of judgment that Paul spoke of. I asked him where he's getting a final judgment in our future, what passage in the Bible he could point to present a final judgment in our future. I said, isn't the only final judgment the one that occurred at the end of Israel's days? Therefore, how does anyone get saved today? And also from what? What does anyone need salvation from today? I presented him with arguments showing that sin is not imputed where there is no law. I presented him with plenty of arguments showing him that only Israel had the law and it was exclusively given to them. Therefore, they were held to a much higher standard and would be judged according to works, like Paul says in Galatians 3, cursed is everyone who does not continue to do all things which are written in the book of law. And cursed is everyone who is under the works of the law, said Paul, which matches what Jesus said in Matthew 16, that when he comes, he will judge each according to his works. So there was this final judgment that was exclusively for those under the law, pertaining only to Israel, because only they had the law. And I presented Don with all these ridiculously strong arguments. And all I ever got back from Don was the same repeated, regurgitated, short 2-3 sentence paragraph that said, well, God judged pagans. I already showed you that God judged the Amorites. If God didn't impute sin to them, why would he have judged the Amorites? Why would he have judged pagan nations? And so I continued to tell him that most of the time, if not all the time, when God judged a foreign nation or foreign peoples in the Bible, it always had to do with the apple of his eye. In other words, it always had to do with their interactions with Israel, his people. If you read through the prophets, you can see this clearly. Literally every single foreign nation mentioned, Tyre, Edom, Egypt, all these places, they all interacted with Israel in a harsh way, in a persecution type of way. Of course, we know the captives were all out in these nations, Assyria and whatnot. So there was reason why God judged them, and the prophets are very clear that it was most of the time because of their persecution of Israel, the apple of his eye. And I told him that this all stems from the promise made to Abraham that God would curse those who cursed him and his descendants. It also stems from the promise made to Moses later on, where Moses promises the children of Israel that they would possess the gates of their enemies, and God would drive out nations, and God would make nations bow before them, and God would eliminate and destroy any nations from before their presence. God made that promise to them in the beginning, that nations would fall for their protection. Nations would die and would be destroyed for their protection. They were the apple of his eye. So I presented him with all that information, and he continued to play dumb, right? He continued to ask, but why did God judge them then if they're not part of the judgment? See, what Don's not understanding is there was a main story here, a salvation narrative of Israel. And only Israel would inherit the promise of eternal life, according to the Bible. Like Jesus said, he came only for them. So Don is equating nation earthly judgments where God just slaughters nations and gets them out of the way of Israel or punishes them for their treatment of Israel. He's equating that with the final judgment where Israel would stand before the books and be judged according to the works done under their exclusive law. Right? He's equating the two things, but there's no equating those. They're not related to one another. There is a central theme running through this story, and the end was that Israel was going to rise and stand before the books, okay? And then there's this sort of side dishes that are going on where God is eliminating and destroying countries for the sake of Israel. But those two things cannot be mixed together. Totally different, okay? So I presented Don with that argument, and I also showed him at least 15 to 20 passages from the Old Testament that show this clearly. I mean, clear as day. God literally states, I destroyed this nation because of the way they treated you, Israel. I gave him about 15 to 20 of those, and literally like 12 different nations were mentioned in those passages that I presented to him. Now, interestingly enough, as most of you know, Don recently deleted me. A few days ago, he decided that he was going to delete and block me from commenting on his YouTube channel, along with the other handful of IO proponents that were there sort of interacting. And the reason why is because he claims that we were ungodly and this, that, and the other. And I've been reading the comments of Don's audios for, a while, not religiously, but every once in a while. And he gets some pretty obnoxious people on there that say some pretty obnoxious stuff, especially from the futurist camp. If those of you who are aware of Michael Erickson on Facebook, Don put up with Michael Erickson's brash language of calling him a clear moron over and over and over again for many, many months before Don blocked him. I never called Don a moron or an idiot. Did I use sort of a trash talk type of language on his channel from time to time? Of course I did, because I'm frustrated with the lack of honesty from these guys, okay? And the genius way of wiggling around arguments and sort of not engaging the points so as to not show that they're wrong. It's very frustrating when these straw man arguments are built and these guys are playing dumb. So I would, kind of jab at that with somewhat sarcastic remarks like, your arguments are getting manhandled, Don. Come on, what are you doing? And he didn't like that. And so he ended up blocking us so that we can no longer comment on it. But what he also did once he blocked us is he went ahead and he deleted, because you have to actually delete comments. You can't just block somebody. The comments will still be there. So he went ahead and he deleted all the comments, including the thread that he and I were going back and forth in, where he was playing dumb, saying, but why did God judge foreign pagan nations then if they're not part of this story? That makes no sense. Clearly, these nations had imputed sin. He kept saying this over and over and over again. And I'm so glad that a bunch of you were involved in that, because now that that thread is gone, it would be my word alone, but now we have many, many eyeballs on that, and you all know that that's what he said. In fact, many of you were kind of trying to tell him, hey, look, Don, that doesn't have anything to do with the imputed sin story of Israel under the law. But he kept coming back, but why? But why did he judge nations, right? And so he deleted that whole entire thread, so no longer can any of you see that thread and what I said to him and him playing dumb. But I have it quoted and everything, and we'll share that in a minute. But what's interesting is after that thread took place, that was on Morning Musings number 295. There were a couple threads where I was involved. One of them actually is still up there. He didn't delete that one. But the one with all the incriminating evidence on it, it had like 40 comments. He deleted that quickly. And what was interesting is after that thread had kind of started kicking off and Don was playing dumb, a friend of mine, Mike Bradley, found a YouTube teaching from Don from about 6 or 7 years ago, where Don basically shoots himself in the foot here. Because in that video, Don explains clearly why God judged foreign nations. Don is very well aware why God judged foreign nations. And this video that I'm going to share with you and the clips from it will show exactly that Don was in full agreement with what I was sharing with him just 6 or 7 years ago. But now, all of a sudden, Don doesn't know why God judged foreign nations, right? He's playing dumb because of course he sees that IO is kind of on the rise and people are starting to come aboard and understand it because it's so very clear. So Don wants to play dumb and sort of hope that all the unintelligent people that are on his channel will actually agree with him and think that that's a valid argument. Little do they know, though, that Don actually knows the answer, and it's right here in one of his old videos that I'm going to share with you shortly. So I actually pasted that video in his comments also, telling people, hey, look, Don actually does know. So Don, why were you asking me why God judged pagan nations if you already know the answer? Because it was because of Israel. And so all of that was deleted. So not only was I deleted and blocked, and everybody else who was interacting and smashing him with valid biblical arguments, they were also blocked, but he went ahead and he deleted all the incriminating evidence. So anyways, I mean, obviously you guys know when someone deletes comments and blocks people, it's very telling. All right, it's very telling that they don't want people to see things. I've never deleted comments on any of my audios, okay, unless someone was a clear idiot, like Jerry Bowers when he came on and called a lady an effing you know what on my channel. That I deleted. But Don deleted all these comments, and really, like I said, nobody was really that crude in their comments. We were just kind of a little cocky, and Don didn't like that. So I think what he was doing, he was waiting for enough to be said so that he could have somewhat of a lame excuse to delete everybody and then go ahead and just do away with the problem once and for all. But again, the point here is that Don lied. Clear as day, he lied. He said that he wasn't aware and he didn't know why God judged foreign nations. I told him it was pretty much always because of Israel, God's people, meaning that it wasn't because of imputed sin under the law. But he played dumb and he said, why is that? That makes no sense, blah, 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 blah. But in this audio that I'm going to show you, he clearly knows. So let's see. So we're going to share a couple things. So the first thing that I asked Don in that thread, I said, Don, why do you think God has not judged any nations today or over the last 2,000 years? You know, why is God not judging the nations who persecute these so-called New Covenant Christians, right? Islam, all these places that slice the necks of Christians. You'd think God would be pretty upset about that stuff and go in there and wreak havoc. But he really hasn't, all right? And there hasn't been any kind of wipe out nations like God used to do in the days of Old Covenant Israel. None of that has happened. And so Don's exact reply to that was, you do not know if God judges nations today. He very well could be judging nations today. All right, so that was his response to me. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play you a clip from Don's video here. And if you want to look it up, it's called The Japanese Earthquake Number 2. Where were the prophets? All right, so let's listen to what Don has to say for about 30 seconds on that topic. Again, the topic is Don replying to me saying, you do not know if God judges nations today. He very well could be judging nations today. Ready? This is Donnie Boy.
3, 6 and 7, God said that he would not bring judgment without sending his prophets. I raised the question, was there a prophet sent to Japan to warn them of the impending earthquake and tsunami? The obvious answer is no.
All right, so that's Don saying that God would always send a prophet before his judgments. So does that really jive with what he just said about there very well could be judgments today? If so, Don, where are the prophets? Okay, out of your own mouth. Now here's another interesting thing that he said. This one's a little longer. Take a listen.
But here's the key to this. When God spoke about foreign countries, when God predicted catastrophes, judgments coming on foreign countries, what did he do? He named those countries over and over again. God would speak of the impending judgment. As a matter of fact, in Jeremiah 25 and Ezekiel 25, God spoke of judgment that was coming on, quote, all the nations, unquote. And he gives a list of 25 nations, enumerating them by name and saying what was going to happen to them. very specifically enumerating what was going to happen to them. The point is this: when God brought judgment upon a given nation, point number one, the prophet was sent to that nation in most instances. Point number two, the prophet specifically named the nation that was going to come under God's wrath.
Okay, now you heard all that, right? I mean, how incriminating is this? Don is saying that God only judged nations when he sent a prophet to them and named the nation. So when I asked Don the other day why God hasn't judged any nations in 2,000 years since the end of his old covenant people, he said, you don't know if God judges nations today. He could be, in other words, he's playing dumb. But here from his own mouth, he admits that God never judged a nation without sending mostly never judged a nation without sending a prophet to them or without at least naming them. All right, now that's pretty incriminating, but the next stuff I'm going to share to you is quite concerning. All right, so the next question that I asked Don is, basically I told him, I said, look, you're equating foreign nation judgments with Israel's salvation story. Foreign nations were not under the law. They didn't have imputed sin. All right. The reason why foreign nations were judged, Don, was because they always toyed with the apple of God's eye, aka Israel, his chosen people, whom he set above all peoples on the face of the earth, and whom he promised to protect by all means, by any means necessary in the beginning of the story. So I let him know this. I even provided him with scriptures, and he came back and played dumb, and he repeatedly said, God judged foreign nations repeatedly in the Old Testament. Why did God judge foreign nations in the scriptures if their sin wasn't imputed to them? Right? He never so much as mentioned a peep about God judging nations because of Israel. Not even a peep. And he deleted that thread, but those of you who are listening, I know that you know the truth, and there were many that saw this. Heck, even his own followers can't deny this because they read it all, I'm sure. He did not mention a peep about the fact that God's judgments usually related to the nation's intermingling and persecution of his people. He just kept repeating the question, why did God judge those nations then if they're not part of this story? So here's Don Preston telling people just 6-7 years ago in this audio why God judged foreign nations. Let's take a listen, shall we?
And there's a third point that is very, very critical. Most of the time, perhaps a few exceptions to the rule, but most of the time, the great majority of times in which God brought judgment on a foreign nation, whether that be Egypt, Cush, Tyre, Sidon, Assyria, or Babylon, the reason that he brought judgment on them was because of their interaction with Israel and their abuse and persecution, and in the case of Assyria and Babylon, of their enslavement of Israel.
Holy cow. Did anyone just hear that? I sure did. That is Don K. Preston admitting clear as day, actually going above and beyond. The great majority of times, with maybe a few exceptions, God judged nations because of their interactions and enslavement and persecution of Israel. So there's Don K. Preston agreeing with my view completely. Completely. Yet when I asked him, and when I presented him with that fact that he just said there, he dodged, he danced, he dipped, he wiggled, and he came back with an argument that was basically just him playing dumb, hoping that this would all go away and his audience would buy into it. Saying, well, why did God judge foreign nations then? Right? Isn't this incriminating evidence? I'm sure his followers will say, no. But honest people will admit, Don knew darn well what the answer to this was, yet he chose to play dumb in the comments for the sake of weaving and wiggling around what is so very clear here. And so I have one more clip that I want to share of Don hammering this point home. Don, why did God judge foreign nations in the Old Testament?
Therefore, if we follow the biblical pattern, the biblical precedent, the biblical message, if you please, the times in which God did bring judgment on foreign nations, He did not simply bring judgment arbitrarily on a nation for no reason. Most of the time, let me emphasize, most of the time, it was because of that nation's interaction with Israel, their abuse of Israel, their enslavement of Israel, their persecution of Israel.
Well, I think that just kind of puts the hammer to the nail, doesn't it? Donnie just clearly taught all of his listeners why God judged foreign nations. Yet somehow today, when IO is on the rise, that's Don's main go-to point, that God judged foreign nations for their sin, for their imputed sin under the law. But Don here is very accurate, actually, in his video, explaining why God judged foreign nations. And unfortunately, you cannot see the 20 Old Testament passages that I gave to Don, which clearly state this, because he deleted all of them. But that is indeed why God judged foreign nations. So you cannot combine the two. You can't say that God judged foreign nations, therefore they're part of the final judgment. The reason why God judged foreign nations is because of the apple of his eye, Israel. So thanks, Don, for that very biblical and very accurate scriptural teaching there. Unfortunately, you've sort of been playing dumb lately and showing us that you are not very honest. So we just queued up Don's video. Don played dumb and he lied. And I've already shared with you earlier, too, about how he blocked all these people and he removed all of our comments. There are some up there. I think if you go back to, I kind of get them mixed up now because there were a few different videos, but there was I'm not sure what morning musings it was where that thread was on. It could have been 295, it could have been 298, I'm not really sure, but it was there and everybody saw it and they know exactly what Don said, but that's been removed. But he left some of our interactions up from older ones. The Daniel Rogers stuff is still up. I went back and checked that because even if he blocks you, you can still see his page and other people's comments. And what's interesting, I didn't know on YouTube, if somebody blocks you from commenting, you can actually still comment on their video and see your own comment, but other people can't see it. And so that's kind of how I realized that I was blocked. I had commented a few days ago in the morning, putting Don to the flame again on some very problematic texts for his position, and nobody replied. There was no interaction for like 5 hours, so I went back and I'm like, this is strange. So then I contacted a buddy of mine, Jack, and I said, hey, can you go over there and look and see if my comment is there, because I commented earlier today and he went over there and sure enough it wasn't there. So I could see it, but nobody else can see it. So he did all that, right? And then so then I emailed him and I just basically told him that he was a coward, and I said, you're basically blocking people because you have no arguments. And then he came back and said, first of all, my YouTube forum does not belong to you and your followers to come and control the discussion, as you and they did. Then he said, you and your followers were not respectful. When I read the continuing insulting and ungodly verbiage after I had warned you, I took action. You have been refuted every way possible. Your arguments have no strength other than superficiality. You ignore valid arguments. You ignore history, logic, and proper exegesis. Your exchange with William Bell proved this beyond doubt. And then he said, and countless people have not asked me to debate you. A few have, but far more have suggested that I don't. And then another one, he says, because I told him, I said, unblock me or I'm going to roast you. And he said, I may consider unblocking you at some point simply to expose your illogical and exegetically flawed arguments, but not at this point. So you can see what Donnie Boy did. He blocked me because he has no arguments. He says that my exchange with William Bell proved that I have no arguments, yet I basically evaporated William Bell's arguments into thin air and he didn't even come back. Okay, William Bell vanished, disappeared. It's been 3 weeks. I'm going to share something with you about William Bell in a moment, but it's almost 3 weeks now, and no argument from William Bell. Obviously, if he now responded, I wouldn't be able to reply because I've been banned from the channel. Anyways, so the day that he blocked me, I was still going on his page and reading what was going on, because there were a couple of my followers were over there. A good friend of mine, Jack, who has been a follower and a friend of mine for years now. He purchased my books. He followed my website when it was up and running. And he's one of the guys that I kind of exchange texts with when he has questions. But, I mean, the guy's brilliant. He picks up on it quick. And just like Barris and Bradley, I mean, these are brilliant Bible minds, and they get it, like you don't have to explain very much to them. They just pick it up very quickly. And so with these guys, we shoot text back and forth and bounce things off each other, but they get it, and they can hold their own in any discussion with anybody. I don't care if you're a self-proclaimed scholar or educated, it doesn't matter. And then another guy, this new guy his name is MannedMe1911, I think, or 1991. This guy's brilliant. He at first he gave me a little bit of a pushback, but instantly he picked right up on it, and it's good to have him around. He's actually fitting in quite nicely. I like his sarcasm and humor when he comments and stuff. But he was over there, kind of fighting the good fight, if you will, along with Jack. And so I'm reading these comments, and there was this one bozo named John Doe, I think his name was, and this guy was just totally triggered. You could tell that he had the cognitive dissonance thing going, where he was so pissed off. And what I found was funny is this guy's calling Jack and this other man-me guy idiot and fool and all kinds of different insults, and Don's okay with it, right? So because this guy's on Don's side, those insults are permittable, right? They're okay. But I never called anybody an idiot on his page. I basically just used a little bit of cocky sarcasm, and I got banned, okay? So quite telling there that Don allows the people in agreement with him to lash out at others, but won't allow it to be said back to people from those who are not in agreement with him. But anyways, I was reading some of the comments, and this guy, John Doe, is just triggered, right? And of course, Don is barely getting involved. He's just chiming in with the same argument. People were judged for their sin long before Israel, right? The same thing that I just showed you that he knows why. That's all he keeps saying. He's playing it very safe and very smart as to not jeopardize his ministry. But this bozo Jack, or John Doe, is interacting with Jack and MannedMe. I got to get MannedMe's name so I don't have to keep saying that. But if you're listening, Jack and MannedMe, kudos to you guys. I appreciate what you did there. But anyways, they're going back and forth, and this guy John, I'm getting all confused, John Doe, is applying Jeremiah 31 to him today, right? And then he says that Hebrews 8 is applicable to him today. And so Jack tells him, like, dude, what are you even talking about? Like, have you read that text? It's only for the house of Israel and the house of Judah, right? And so then he says to him, which house are you from? And just basically holding this guy to the fire. And this guy's getting all triggered, calling him an idiot and showing that he clearly has no arguments. And so that was kind of cool. But then what was interesting is the next day, which as of right now, I'm recording this on Saturday. This would have been yesterday, Friday. Preston shared his typical morning musing. And I guess Jack commented on it with some problematic questions. And Jack text messaged me a few hours later and said, I questioned Preston this morning and he hasn't responded yet. So I went over to read his questions, and sure enough, they weren't there. All right. So again, what happened? Well, Don deleted and removed those comments, and he banned Jack from commenting on the page as well. And Jack was pretty pissed off. What's up, Jack? Anyway, so he did that again, and he removed the comments, which was super telling because according to Jack, he had pressed him on some pretty important things, like 1 Corinthians 10. I think he asked him, why would Paul refer to their fathers passing through the Red Sea? And also something on Revelation 7, like, I think he said that since we see the great multitude from all nations having risen and inherited their promise at the very end there, isn't that the blessing that was promised to Abraham, that he would be a blessing to many goyim or many nations? And so Don really got kind of I guess, scared from these questions, and so he removed them pretty much immediately and didn't even engage with them. So again, very telling what's going on here. He's deleting comments, he's blocking people, and Jack told me he was very respectful. He tried, the previous night, which those comments I actually read with John Doe. He didn't lash back at John, even when John called him an idiot. He tried to remain cool. And the following day, he was very respectful in his comment to Don, but Don chose to just remove it and delete it and block him from commenting. So you can tell what's going on. Again, Don is not allowing any IO proponents to make any arguments, because he realizes that people are going to see these arguments and they're going to understand the validity of them. Not everybody. I mean, you still got bozos who don't get it. Like, one of his followers came over to my page yesterday and started saying stuff like, I don't know. He just made up some long thing about Romans 9. I told him he was wrong. And then I told him Matthew 24:14 is a game over statement. All nations receive the gospel by the coming. And then he went on and he said, no, that's about the destruction of Jerusalem. That's the end that was in view. And I said, yeah, but you're not understanding. That was tied to all nations getting the gospel. When that destruction took place, no other nations would get the gospel, because the end came and all the elect were raised on the last day. And so he kept coming back with these ridiculous replies that made no sense. But that's just how these guys operate, right? They're not very biblically bright. Unfortunately, they got a guy, in Don that is biblically bright and surely sees all these things, because heck, I just showed you he taught on it 7 years ago. But he's not being honest. He's playing dumb so as to kind of lead people on that IO is false, when in actuality, he knows darn well that IO is true, because he's blocking people and not allowing us to comment. So anyways, yeah, very telling what's going on here. And in other news, I just couldn't resist. Last night I went over to Billy Bell's page on YouTube. It's called William Bell, All Things Fulfilled. And I commented on his audio. He's got part 1 of Matthew 24:35, I think it is, where Jesus says, my words won't pass away. He's got part 1 of 3 there. That's the audio that I commented on, and I'm going to hold him to the fire, and I'm going to try to be super fragile with these guys, because apparently they get very sensitive when IO guys comment. I don't want to get blocked by Billy Bell, but I figured I'd go sniff him out, right, and just kind of engage him on that. So I asked him, last night I asked him a question on Matthew 24:14, and boy, oh boy, you guys have to go check out his answer and how ridiculously ignorant and stupid it is. This guy is ignoring the clear facts. He's wiggling, he's dancing, just like the futurists do. It's very dishonest, and it's a straw man tactic. So go over there, William Bell, All Things Fulfilled on YouTube, type that in, and check out part 1 of 3 on the Matthew 24:35 audio that he just shared. It's only like a 13-minute audio. I didn't listen to it because I wouldn't subject myself to that sort of pain. But yeah, check it out. Check out the comments. He replied. I replied. I'm going to reply again, and hopefully I'll be able to keep him engaged where he doesn't run off into the woods and hide like he did 3 weeks ago on Daniel Rogers' video. So yeah, check that out. Take a look at it. Look at the pathetic replies so far, especially this second one. I think he replied just recently, where he completely ignores my questions, completely ignores them, and plays dumb and says, does the kingdom have no end? Therefore, your position is wrong, or something like that. It's like, Bell, can a kingdom have no end even if it's not for you? Yes, obviously. A kingdom can have no end if it was for a specific people only. And that's what Bell is playing dumb with. He's acting like the term no end must mean that people can continuously come in for all time. But that's not what that means. The promise was only for Israel, and only those written in the Lamb's Book of Life would inherit the kingdom. Like Luke 20 says, those who were worthy to attain that age. That age is the kingdom. Okay, that is the everlasting spiritual kingdom. And like Luke says in Luke 20, or Jesus says, those who are worthy to attain that age would become like angels in heaven and wouldn't die anymore, nor would they marry anymore. So William Bell is married, William Bell's going to die, and William Bell surely isn't an angel. So William Bell is obviously not in the age to come. He didn't attain to it because he wasn't even alive. He wasn't part of Old Covenant Israel. So a lot of problems, but check that out. William Bell, All Things Fulfilled. The part 1 of 3 on his Matthew 24:35 teaching is where I'm going to try to engage him and expose his false teachings. But I think that's where I'm going to leave it, folks. Pretty concerning and alarming when people are dishonest like this, all while claiming to be a Christian. I just showed you some clear audio clips of Don K. Preston. He clearly understands why foreign nations were judged in this story. He clearly understands that God has not judged any nation in over 2,000 years, or just about 2,000 years, and he is simply just playing dumb. But he's got his comfort back because he's blocked and banned all of us from his channel. How pitiful. Anyways, folks, I thank you for listening today. I encourage you, if you do interact with these gentlemen in the Facebook world or wherever you're interacting, hold them to the flame. I mean, get on these guys. Ask them questions. Just ask them very simple questions and watch the straw men and the dishonest tactics come up. And it's quite sickening, actually. But do it, get these guys engaged. They may end up blocking you, but try your best to see what kind of answers they have, because so far they've presented absolutely nothing of intelligence. All right, folks, I'm going to leave you with a very fitting song. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Take care, everybody. We'll be back another time. Bye-bye.
I wonder if you know that I know he's lying right now. Oh, you got the new Modella?
DJ Philly's famous.
I see you. That's your BMW? That's nice. That's your girl? Golly. Okay, I see you. But I just want to know one thing. You ready? Why the lying? Why you always lying? Oh my God. Stop lying. Always lying to me. You lying so much. You making it hard for me. Yeah. Every time you tell me something, I figure that you're lying.